I know you didn't want to talk about it, and I wasn't going to talk about it. It's in the past, and I'd like to leave it there, but it's hard because 40K keeps creeping in, right? So I think we should talk about it. We'll talk about these guys. Hey, guys, Krusty, Old Crow, here today. I'm not going to call this the usual TCCC because I'm not working on much other than just a little bit of paint on some stuff. I'm actually feeling pretty ill today. Normally I wouldn't make a video when I'm feeling this lousy, but I don't feel so lousy that I can't put a smile on my face, you know what I mean, and talk about something that's been coming up. And actually it was worth talking about. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, let's call this one Warhammer 40K versus Classified, and why Classified won when it came to me. You've heard me mention from time to time that I am aware of Warhammer 40K. In fact, I'm not only just aware of it, I used to be an avid player and collector of Warhammer 40K. Oh, I lost my bookmark. Looks like I have to start all over. This was my favorite series of books in Warhammer 40K, and therefore my favorite army. I'll talk to you about what I know about 40K. In this video, just a quick video about it, because I was just talking to my buddy Shane, well, our buddy Shane in the chat, who we now know even more as Same Time Toys. If you guys haven't checked out that channel, do so. I'll show you that in the slideshow later. But we were talking, and we are talking about 40K just for a second there. It wasn't like we were having a lengthy conversation, but he brought up 40K, and I had been watching his World Eaters army and thinking, yeah, you know, I bet you there's a lot of G.I. Joe collectors out there that are familiar with 40K, but there's probably a lot that aren't, and they're hearing it come up more and more lately. Why is that? Guys like Wraith Mace and Same Time Toys and others who are starting to show 40K is where creativity really begins for a lot of people, right? It introduces them to painting and building things and whatnot. So I find a lot of guys who do customs are very familiar with the company Games Workshop. And that's what this video really is about. It's not just about Joe versus Ultramarines here, 40K. It's also about Hasbro versus Games Workshop and business strategies that are at play here, and where things go from beautiful to very sour, and how that trap is too easy for a company to walk into. And I am not 100% convinced that our favorite companies today won't eventually walk into it as well. So let's take it through Crow's old sloppy ad hoc slideshow and show you what am I talking about when I talk about 40K. When I talk about Warhammer 40K and the company Games Workshop, guys, you are looking at armies of plastic and resin, and it used to be pewter metals, that are formed like this. Massive, massive horde armies of highly technical, advanced, futuristic, armored soldiers and aliens, basically. The Xenos threat and demons galore. What they had going for them as a property is essentially, back then, they took what we saw in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons and of Lord of the Rings, where you had elves and you had dwarves and you had humans and you had orcs and things like that. And they said, what if we cast that out into space and gave them all a whole lot of tech and put them on this massive, they don't just share a continent, they share space. Who wins the battle for space, right? And that started off as such a great premise. And as kids in the 80s, when this game came out, we slowly discovered it through word of mouth at our local comic stores and things like this. And things were happy and there was wonder. And we were like, what is this 40K universe? Grimdark future, only war, yay. And so it eventually evolved into a massive war set tabletop game where human is constantly on the brink of its final days as it faces threats like the Eye of Terror and Chaos, in which, if you were to draw a parallel to that, think of the movie Pandora, was it? Where they were It's a twisted chaos where evil corrupts your soul and you're convinced that the universe was always meant to be chaos, and that any fool that believes in a god or a deity or a false emperor, let's say, is destined to learn this the hard way. But chaos will teach you the easy way through your pain and suffering. They will incorporate you into its folds through madness, right? Or maybe aliens, like as in the movie Aliens, where they translate into another horrid alien called the Tyranid. And maybe you're up against a hive mind that was always meant to devour the universe, like Starship Troopers. You guys have started hearing more and more about it because you've heard the name Henry Cavill attached to a desire to do this Warhammer 40K universe into some sort of cinematic response for the consumers. And it would do well if it was done properly. The problem is that this universe was always mismanaged property in the open, improperly in the open market media, as in we had a movie. It was a Space Marine movie, and it was animated, and it was absolutely terribly done, even for its time. I don't have any footage here because I don't think anything was worth saving, and therefore I didn't want to grab it. But it was terrible. But we'd always been promised there would be an Inquisitor movie. There would be another movie for 40K, and it would meet this industrial standard that Games Workshop had set very high for itself, and reflect truly what a great property that is. So when Henry Cavill, who played this game a lot through his life, stresses an interest in it, now people are listening. But did you know Robin Williams was a massive fan of Warhammer 40K and had an Eldar army worth reveling in? It's true. There's a lot of celebrities that played this game. It had an underground culture. So when it started off in like the 80s, I believe, your first rule books and everything kind of looked like this. And it all focused really on Space Marines, particularly the Ultramarines, because they were the most appealing to promote it. But then slowly other chapters of Marines would work their way in, like the legendary Blood Angels, which are basically good guy vampires. I don't know. I never played Blood Angels. I never got into the lore. It was one of the few armies I didn't. But back then, it was very much more of an amateur production and very similar to not Games Workshop, but Dungeons and Dragons, Dragon Magazine, and other game-based materials. It was often drawn by the fans, produced by the fans, and created into a business by the fans, right? Like these guys all come together. And the art was never overly stellar. It wasn't really about the art. The art was there to kind of tell a sideline story. It was very much comic art, right? Comic-y art. More like Heavy Metal Magazine, if you guys used to read that. But the point was, back then, you would get a box of figures at a reasonable price, and you would learn to paint and play. You would work those two things together. Paint and play. And that wasn't very well... that wasn't really structured into play back when, in the 80s, when I was a kid. This is the kind of game that first introduced you to paint and play, right? All of our toys were coming painted, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, any Barbies, all that stuff, all came pre-painted. We just went right from box to play. But this was about gratification on a new level. This was about you presenting what you think they look like. You could do them by their standards, and you could order figures from custom sites and do stuff on that custom sites, their home site. But at this point, this was the first glimpse of where things were gonna go for Games Workshop as a larger company. And what was it? It was gonna be dependent on another subsidiary company. I'm not quite sure what their business connection, if they fall under a direct command or if they have a contract with each other or whatever, but eventually they would get into a place called Forge World, but we'll get there. So Games Workshop eventually evolved their model collection and their materials and everything. And what ended up happening is they switched from pewters to a lot more plastics. Now, when you deal in plastics, of course, you're going to get into the oil pricing market, and that's going to affect your pricing, right? And as they grew their army, of course, their art grew better, their fan base grew larger over the years. But of course, one thing they had to do was keep rewriting rules. and making new armies and new units and things like this and update, keep it fresh. What would we call that in classified? We call those wave releases, right? So they'd warn you off, there's a new codex coming. And codexes are these expensive little books that you have to buy just for that one army you're running. You need a much larger codex or a book for the rules. Not sure how it's all working in the electronic age, but I believe that even the downloads cost a pretty penny. We'll get rid of that big book. Right? A box of Deathwing Knights. I'm going to show you this to show you where they sit today. Okay? This is Deathwing Knights. I believe they are for the Dark Angel army, if I remember right. And yeah, you see you get 7 miniatures if you look at that bottom corner there. It says 7 miniatures. Now, a miniature is no bigger than my thumb. And that is literally about the size of a Deathwing Knight. Closer to maybe a bottle of paint. All right, I got 7 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's awesome. That's 7 bottles of paint right there. If I were to put a price on this, I would say it's close to maybe $50 of paint. A box like this with the Deathwing Knights, here in Canada, you're looking at about a $75 to $80 commitment for 7 models, right? So you're paying in a lot of money for these plastics. And every time the price of plastic goes up, it almost starts to drive the price of these models go up. Sorry, not the price of plastics, price of oil goes up. The plastics go up and then the models go up. But if the price of oil ever drops, these will never drop. They'll plateau at their new price point, just like our figures do, right? It's all very familiar. And they have glorious armies. They have the Eldar, which is like the elves in Lord of the Rings. Very mystic. But what the Eldar and their brothers, the Dark Eldar, did is they became too evolved. They're the society that went too far, indulged themselves too much, and accidentally made a god of indulgence and pleasure, and in Slaanesh or whatever they were the goddess of, and destroyed themselves and had to go into hiding. And then they went about things very differently. While these guys were the penitent Catholic type elves, they had their sisters and brothers in the Dark Elves, or Dark Elder, pardon me, which I had a fun army of these with, who were like space pirates and blood, like think Cerebites from Hellraiser, like his kind of guys, floating around in space and just looking for people to torture for the entertainment, right? And the entertainment and the sheer pleasure of their torture. Plus, they're doing wild experiments on themselves to preserve their lives, right? Because they're hiding from this god they created. And they take people to the Comra. This is the Dark Eldar. They're very violent, very bloody. I really enjoyed them. I enjoyed my army of them. My other army that I really enjoyed about them was that was gross, I would say, was my Nurgle Plague army from Warhammer 40k, which I was doing just as I got out. But here's the example of Forge World now. So Games Workshop had their massive market, massive fan base, but they clamor for more, right? So they had Forge World start producing their harder to get, more unique models. And of course, you were going to pay a prettier penny for these. These were rare. These were hard to get. And when you saw a Forge World model on the table, you knew you were in for a bad day, right? But back in the day, when they first started, before they went to a company like Forge World, they had a little thing called the chapter approved updates. And in one of them, they had one where you could make your own vehicles. They gave you rules for you to take simplistic things, like a box or a deodorant stick, and turn them into spaceships and walkers and monsters. And they gave you a very well thought out chart of rules and points costs for you to create your thing, put it on the table and say, it costs this much, that's as much as a Land Raider, therefore that is fair. And it unlocked such creativity, people, and so many orc armies benefited from this. But over the years, because now they had their own company, Forge World, and because they were realizing their own success and what they had done to themselves had allowed people to create toys for their line, which might prevent them from buying their own, right? So they shut that down after a few years of that. They were, next rule book, that's not going to happen anymore. Now, a lot of Private gamers would allow it to happen on their own table, but Games Workshop also has tournaments, and these tournaments are elevated status amongst the gaming community now. So a lot of tournaments and leagues and game leagues would not allow you to play anything but a certain type, certain well-painted, certain specifically represented model. And if you dare brought anything but, you were going to not be able to put it in your tournament, right? This meant a lot to people as this game developed into quite a culture, guys. This game is huge in the military and the subculture. We love our tabletop games, and 40K usually is our introduction. This is the same time Toys here. This is the guy I was talking about with, and he had a World Eaters army I was watching, and me and him were talking, and he's like, so I know you've talked about 40K from time to time, and he's like, yeah, and I was like, and he's, what do you think? I was like, you know what? I gotta talk about why I left it more than anything, right? Did I love it? Yeah, I loved this game for probably 18 years, I would say. My favorite army, as I go through here, was my Gaunt's Ghost army, right? So, sorry, I meant to plug Same Time Toys first. He's a newer channel, but he's been our friend in the chat for a long time, guys, and he's getting it up and going, so I really want people to make sure, if you're not subscribed to that, but you are subscribed to me, just subscribe to this. We're going to talk about the same stuff, and we know it's good. We know how much we like it when our YouTube content guys are connected to each other. We know there's going to be fun to be had there, right? So definitely link up with the guys that you already know in the chat for the most part. And then we got Woody Triple Deuce. I gotta mention him every time I can because the Berman, as he calls himself, he's always pumping out daily content now. And of course, sorry, Cobra Crimson Commander, I didn't put your big picture on there, but I've done you in another video. We have a few chat members doing a lot more, you know, getting out there and starting that channel, and I'm happy to just say, go add them to your list if they're not on there. But yeah, we were talking about 40K, and eventually I was just like, Shane, you gotta watch a lot more Wraith Mace, and I bet you anything he is watching a lot of Wraith Mace, but that's another guy who is going to talk to you about 40K at great lengths a lot and show you some really cool stuff like 40K Joy Toys, which is the one new line that I'm starting to think I might buy a couple. Just a couple, right? This is how it begins. I only collect classified. But those Joy Toy 40K Cadians, those Joy Toy 40K Nemesis Dread Knight for Grey Knights, yeah, like, my God, they're amazing, right? And what they are is basically the best painted battlefield tabletop game representation turned into a articulated 6-inch figure, or, you know, not 6-inch, 4-inch figure. And these things are amazing. Punk with Toys has done a review with those, and even he was saying, like, man, these are nice, right? So yeah, you had other armies if you wanted to be the good guys, but not necessarily be humans. And hey, maybe you're really into Gundam, Robotech, and all them. You had the Tau, always fighting for the greater good. But the good guys that weren't always on the table, they were kind of hard to get, and I really wanted them, so I went hard and got as many of these as I could. It wasn't easy to do, but I built an army of Gaunt's Ghosts, and that was my favorite army. Again, Gaunt's Ghosts in literature is written by a guy named Dan Abnett, who has done several comics, including War of Realms and Kings and whatnot. A lot of the Inhuman stuff, some DC stuff, but the way this guy writes grand scale and small scale conflicts, close contact, and the human aspect of these guys, he's incredible. I love this. This is the best writing, and I mean, there are other great writers doing books on 40K that I have tried to read, like Gav Thorpe and a few others, but I keep coming back to Dan Abnett is the man. So Gaunt's Ghost, highly recommend that as an introduction to 40K, because essentially what Gaunt's Ghost is a Joe recon unit that specializes in stealth that lost their pit and all the other Joes forever, no more coming. So as they go through conflict and certain Joes die, they recruit new Joes from the worlds they save, and they become a scratch company of survivors, right? And they are constantly being jumped from war zone to utilize these stealth and basically guerrilla style operation skills against the might of the chaos and the traitor threat. And it gets gripping. some of these stories. The sub stories, the A and B stories are two different things, but sometimes those C stories keep you going from book to book, and he does it really well. So if you're ever wanting to read it, I know everybody else will tell you, read Horus Heresy. If you're a guy like me, read Gaunt's Ghost first omnibus. It captures the first three. You can order them from Chapters or go to Indigo and things like that. Anyways, they updated the Gaunt's Ghost into a very expensive, I think it was a 6 model kit, but this was the first pewter kit that came. I had that, and then they had some loose ones you would buy, and I would buy these in droves and do conversions on other Catachan and other human figurines to build up my 40k. So this is where I started getting into changing a figure to match what I was picturing, right? So if I were to show you Gaunt's Ghosts for the younger guys, I would associate them. Imagine if the show Vikings was set in the future and they were relegated to a guard, mix it with a bit of the old Irish drinkers and whatnot. But the easiest way to describe these handsome devils really is Sharps rifles. They were based on Sharps rifles. Sean Bean, when he was younger, revolutionary fighters. And yeah, they were very much based on Sharps rifles. The entire character concept of Abram Gaunt is based around Sean Bean's Sharp character. So, really relatable. Games Workshop shops are everywhere, especially in the UK, but you guys probably, if you remember malls, you've seen this logo around, and more specifically, if you've walked through a mall, even though I think they're all dying, you'll occasionally see a shop like that. And that's where you buy these things, and they're very protective of their stuff, but it's also one where you see me getting my Citadel stuff. Now, you can get Citadel stuff pretty much anywhere now, but Games Workshop stuff is a very tightly controlled merchandise, and you ask any small-time retailer if they're making profits off anything Games Workshop, it's usually probably not. But they sell, right? I talked about these tournaments. This is where everything starts going south. As this company goes better and gets more tournaments, it gets more popular, and people want more, and then they want to pit it up against each other, and they always want to win. So that's, one thing it inspired was great painting, and then they started synthesizing that. But when they start making exclusive rules as to what can be put in there as content and things like this, all these contests were designed to promote their own product, of course, but your talents, your time, and more importantly, your money. And it was becoming transparent after a while. They started to embrace the fact that they could be a mega giant killer game, and they decided to start raising the stakes with their stock. Now, this is somebody's own beast that they created, but down below is a Forge World, I believe. It's either that's a knight. Okay, so knights start showing up. $200 model kits that would appear on the table and give you an even bigger dimension of play. Now, you'll see on this side right here, that's a Warhound Titan. There's another Titan. Those are Forge World kits. Those are like $600, $700, $800 more. But the lower level statues are the ones that they were available in retail. $200 price point kits. And we bitch about the Vamp at its price point. And yeah, I mean, like, we come from the same market strategies at times. So what that ends up doing is making you want to pull away from the company because the games are becoming too competitive. People are walking out of there going, I cannot believe you brought that model to this friendly game, because now they're so focused on making money, they forgot to do one thing: make the game fair and balanced so that people have a chance. It became a matter of who had more money and more access to a catalog to thump their opponent into a ground with new armies or units from specialized Forge World or downloadable PDFs, formation units, where the other opponent had to guess at what the rules are because they had no idea, or they only just got familiar with it and they haven't been able to keep their army up to date to remain competitive. Or worse yet, as was the case in what's called D weapons, which is basically a god gun that just, you're dead. There's no rolling for saves. Don't bother. Doesn't matter how much points in defense you have. Dead. Those kind of guns start coming into games, and nothing is available to counter it for like 6 months to a year. So the game became very tilted and imbalanced, became a lot of not fun for a lot of people, despite glorious models, a vast array of characters, excellent painting strategies, excellent molds, more access than they've ever known. Basically, everything that the kid from the beginning of the slideshow, these happy kids wanted for that game, they got. And what it turned into was, well, guys, in the future, there is only war. All right? War in retail took out the war of fun. And people turned their back to the game. They were upset. And I was one of them. And the reason why is because it became transparent to me that I was constantly going to be spending about $1,000 to $2,000 a year just keeping my game, my army that I've already invested almost 5,000 to 10 in at some points, over years of playing. No, let's say 5,000 being the max. I don't want to say it was half a car. 5,000, I would say, is a healthy contribution into that company. But now I'm going to have to be paying about $1,000 a year, I'd say, just to keep it competitive and enjoy the game with friends that are doing the same thing. It was ludicrous to me. And to have entire units that you've paid hundreds of dollars for suddenly get moved to obsolete, unplayable land because my rulebook changed this year and those characters no longer exist. Therefore, they're no longer allowed to be in play. That really sucked. And that started early. That started after they started realizing they didn't want you to do customization. There was a point where the Imperial Guard army had the Gaunt's Ghost and several others. And the idea was for you to do kit bashing. Remember kit bashing? Sure you do, right? You do kit bashing when you order from Gridiron. Gridiron to Classified is what Forge World was to Games Workshop, really. It makes their product so much better. And you want it more because you know you can access this. And it would look so much better on your shelf than that plain one does on that kind of shelf. Or just not even something sinister like that. You just want the best for your collection. You want the best for yourself. So a company's going to grow and expand on that, and they're going to do that. So yeah, I left Games Workshop because I found the game becoming less enjoyable. I enjoyed the hobby of painting and building, clearly, right? But I didn't like that investment of not knowing if that unit that I took such pride in had a chance in 5 more years to even exist anymore. I didn't like buying new books with tedious little tweaks to rules that should just be download updates. I didn't like all of this and the way that they expanded. As a company owner, I would have loved it. We've seen a few 40K collector figures in my army when I get them from guys like Digital Diarrhea, provided me with this beautiful Necron McFarlane blank. Because I did one conversion, out of a McFarlane blank Acadian, and that wound up being Bull for my RDC, my very first, I guess, custom for Classified. I was playing and learning at that time. I still have a Chaos version of that I'm working on, but I don't think he's going to be a Crimson Guard Immortal anymore. I'm not sure what he is. No, I have a plan for this, but recent Skybound stuff has kind of altered that plan. But they make great figures, and I'm not trying to say if you're enjoying Warhammer 40K, you're wrong. You're wrong, you're sheep, all of that. If that's the gist that you took out of this video, that was the wrong message, not the one I wanted to send. I won't slam a company making money hand over fist for being successful. I'll slam them for not being transparent and for being deceptive and for manipulating their consumers. And I do feel Games Workshop has done more than its fair share of that. There are several other tabletop games out there, and this is what makes it easy to walk away from 40K. What you'll find is now startups and Kickstarters and things like this that make really good games with a lot more affordable miniatures. They're not out to manipulate and take the max price points off of every single accessory that's going to come for their game. Not when they're getting started. So it's a fresh take on being at the beginning of, say, 1980, being those kids again and saying, oh, this game looks really good, and Games Workshop has to be aware of this. They've seen games like Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars Legion, starting to hit tabletops more and more. Infinity has been on the tabletops for years. Flames of War for the war realists. They know they've got markets that are competing against them. And reputation can really screw you in the end. Games Workshop to me is teetering on a fence right now with the Henry Cavill trying to get involved. And if you're following that, you'll realize that's not always assured that he is actually coming up with the project. The desire is there. GW is one part of that equation, whether they'll let that property be a movie. Producers are another, and then money is a third. A movie like 40K or a series is going to take a lot of cashola. Games Workshop has it. They've taken it from their consumer, but they're not going to pour it into this movie. It's going to be about who's going to scratch their back for them. So don't be in a rush thinking that movie's coming right around the corner. I'm sure it will come at some point. But the greedy little cash fight that's going to come from that, Games Workshop will be determined to make sure that's not done. But that's a half hour of talking about Warhammer 40K and Games Workshop, guys. I said it before, I'll say it again. I really want to do a singular Gaunt's Ghost for my G.I. Joe Classified. It is one of the things I'm hanging on to, that Warblood that Loki Wartooth sent me to do the camo cloak. I want to do a McVenner or a McCall. And if you've read Gaunt's Ghost, you know exactly who they are, why I want to do them. If you haven't read any of that and you're like, okay, but how am I supposed to? You guys know I like my recon guys. I like my war realism. I like all this stuff. And here I am taking something from Grimdark Future, and I'm going to throw it in my line. Why? Because it's fun as hell, guys. Bottom line, I could tell you I am 2 thumbs down on Games Workshop Forge World and that corrupt game company that made me mad. But the bottom line is, if it's fun and it's your passion, it's 2 thumbs up for me, man. That intellectual property is great. I would never tell somebody to walk away from it. I just had a threshold for bullshit that went off because of it. Who knows? Do I think Classified would ever go that way? No, they're not a tabletop game. But if you're telling me that they're not going to try and take every dollar out of their consumer, and at some point they have to turn down the volume of the consumer feedback to keep making that revenue so they can do future things. We've seen that. I can expect that. I just hope they do it with better grace than what Games Workshop did, because Games Workshop, after a while, it became blatant, it became impersonal, and it started very personally. Hasbro's, this is a bad example, but I'll use it anyways. Hasbro's product of G.I. Joe Classified is extremely personal for a lot of us, because it is tied to that 82 to 94 line, and even the lines after. It is pulling at our childhood heartstrings. So yeah, don't lose sight of it. It's personal to your consumers. Always respect that. But if you're going to make it a little bit more about money, you have to be transparent to your consumer and explain that. And then not claim that you're doing them a favor by giving them more access. You have to explain that your growth of your company is for your benefit and theirs, right? And not leave them out of your thoughts, the way Games Workshop, I found, often did. Anyways, that's going to close it out for that day today, guys. Same time toys, Woody Triple Deuce, Crimson Cobra Commander, of course, 3-star draw, Aaron the Toy Enhancer, Pop Blender, Sevens of Wild, Punk with Toys, It's Chat, everybody on my subs list that is toy tubing right now is all linking together as a part of the toy community. And I really put an emphasis, if you're not following one of those guys, and Wraith Mace is in there, sorry if I didn't mention them, especially for your 40K needs, get them on there. And I will see you guys soon. You know what this video did? It took me from feeling sick to feeling happy and sick. And at least that's a positive, guys. Go do something positive today. We'll see you soon.